The
This
morning
cannot be
sun
allowed to
cast long
continue.
shadows across
What
the
do you
manicured
propose we
gardens of
do?
Windsor Castle as Prince William made his way through the ancient corridors. Something felt different today, though he couldn't quite place what it was. The usual bustling energy of palace staff seemed subdued. Conversations stopped abruptly when he passed, and there was an unmistakable tension hanging in the air like morning fog. William had always possessed an intuitive sense about people and situations, a trait that served him well in his royal duties. Today, that intuition was screaming that something was terribly wrong. As he approached his private study, he noticed his longtime aide, James Thornberry, waiting outside with an expression that could only be described as deeply troubled. "Your Royal Highness," James said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I need to speak with you privately. It's quite urgent." William gestured for James to follow him into the study, closing the heavy oak door behind them. The room, lined with leather-bound books and portraits of previous monarchs, had always been his sanctuary. But today, even this familiar space couldn't provide the comfort he usually found here. "What's troubling you, James?" William asked, settling into his chair behind the mahogany desk that had once belonged to his great-great-grandfather. James hesitated, his hands fidgeting with the papers he carried. "Sir, I've discovered something that I believe you need to see. It concerns the Queen Consort, and I'm afraid it's quite serious." The formal use of Camilla's title didn't escape William's notice. James had always been respectful of protocol, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was struggling with what he was about to reveal. "Show me," William said simply. James placed a folder on the desk, his face pale. "These documents came to my attention through channels I'd rather not discuss in detail, but I can vouch for their authenticity. They detail a series of meetings and communications that have been taking place in secret." William opened the folder and began reading. What he found made his blood run cold. The documents outlined a systematic plan to undermine his authority and position within the royal hierarchy. But what shocked him most was seeing Camilla's name at the center of it all. The papers revealed a network of carefully orchestrated moves designed to gradually shift power within the palace. There were records of private meetings with influential members of parliament, secret discussions with media moguls, and, most damaging of all, detailed strategies for discrediting William's judgment and leadership capabilities. One particular document made William's hands tremble with anger. It was a memo outlining how certain personal struggles he had faced after his mother's death could be used to paint him as emotionally unstable and unfit for greater responsibilities. The clinical, calculating nature of the language used to describe his grief made him feel physically sick. "How long has this been going on?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "From what I can determine, at least 18 months, possibly longer," James replied. "The scope is extensive, sir. It appears to involve several high-ranking officials within the palace administration, as well as external contacts." William continued reading, each page revealing another layer of the elaborate scheme. There were plans to influence public opinion through carefully planted stories in the press, strategies for isolating him from key decision-making processes, and, most troubling of all, discussions about how to handle the William problem if he became too suspicious. One name kept appearing throughout the documents alongside Camilla's: Sir Reginald Hartwell, a longtime palace advisor whom William had never particularly trusted. The communications between them were coded, but the intent was clear. They were working together to systematically dismantle his influence and authority. "There's more, I'm afraid," James said quietly, producing another set of papers. "These detail financial arrangements that I believe constitute a serious breach of protocol, if not outright corruption." The financial documents revealed a complex web of payments and favors that painted a picture of Camilla using her position to benefit personal allies and punish those who opposed her agenda. Money that should have gone to charitable causes had been redirected, contracts had been awarded to companies with connections to her personal network, and palace resources had been used for what could only be described as political maneuvering. William felt a deep sense of betrayal that cut him to his core. Camilla had been part of his life for so many years, had comforted his father during difficult times, and had seemed to genuinely care for the family. To discover that she had been working against him all this time felt like a physical blow. But what hurt most was the realization that his father, King Charles, was likely unaware of what was happening. The documents made it clear that Camilla had been careful to keep her activities hidden from the king, knowing that his loyalty to his son would make him an obstacle to her plans. "What do you recommend we do with this information?" William asked, though he already knew the answer. "Sir, I believe you need to confront this directly, but carefully, James advised. If we move too quickly or without proper preparation, there's a risk that evidence could be destroyed or the situation could be spun against us. William nodded, his mind already working through the implications and potential responses. He knew that exposing Camilla's activities would create a massive scandal that could damage the entire royal family. But allowing her to continue would be even worse, as it would eventually lead to the systematic undermining of everything he and his father had worked to build. I need to see my father immediately, William said, standing up from his desk. But first, I want every piece of evidence secured and copied. If Camilla realizes we're onto her, she'll try to destroy everything. James nodded and began gathering the documents. I've already taken the liberty of creating multiple copies and storing them in secure locations, sir. I also have several trusted contacts who can verify the authenticity of these materials if needed. As William prepared to leave his study, he felt the weight of what he was about to do. Confronting Camilla would not just be a personal matter. It would have implications for the entire monarchy. The public revelation of such a scandal could damage the royal family's reputation for generations. But he also knew that allowing corruption and betrayal to go unchecked would be far worse. The monarchy depended on trust and integrity, and if those foundations were compromised, everything else would eventually crumble. Walking through the palace corridors toward his father's private apartments, William reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Just hours ago, his biggest concern had been reviewing the schedule for an upcoming state visit. Now, he was carrying evidence that would likely result in the most significant royal crisis in decades. The palace staff he passed seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, stepping aside respectfully, but watching him with curious eyes. Word traveled fast within these walls, and he suspected that rumors were already beginning to circulate about his urgent meeting with James, and the serious expression he couldn't quite hide. As he approached his father's study, William paused to collect himself. What he was about to reveal would devastate Charles, who genuinely loved Camilla and trusted her completely. The king had already endured so much public scrutiny regarding their relationship, and now William would have to tell him that the woman he had married and made queen consort had been systematically betraying their family. Taking a deep breath, William knocked on the door and waited for his father's familiar voice to invite him in. The conversation that was about to take place would change everything, and there would be no going back once the truth was revealed. The afternoon lights streaming through the tall windows seemed to dim as William entered the study, carrying with him the evidence that would expose one of the most shocking betrayals in recent royal history. The weight of duty and family loyalty pressed down on his shoulders as he prepared to deliver news that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. King Charles looked up from his desk with a warm smile that quickly faded as he noticed the serious expression on his son's face. The documents in William's hands seemed to represent more than just papers. They carried the potential to destroy relationships, reputations, and perhaps even the stability of the crown itself. "Father," William said quietly, "we need to talk." King Charles set down his fountain pen and gave his son his full attention. The concern in his weathered face deepened as he noticed the folder William carried and the tension radiating from every line of his body. Over the years, Charles had learned to read his children's moods, and what he saw now filled him with dread. "Please, sit down, William," the king said gently, gesturing to the comfortable armchair across from his desk. "You look as though you're carrying the weight of the world." William moved to the chair but remained standing, the documents clutched tightly in his hands. "Father, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear. I've discovered something about Camilla that I believe you need to know immediately." The use of his stepmother's first name, rather than her title, caught Charles's attention. William was always scrupulously proper with protocol, and this deviation suggested something serious was amiss. "What kind of discovery?" Charles asked, though something in his voice suggested he might already suspect that his world was about to be turned upside down. William opened the folder and carefully extracted the most damaging documents. "These papers detail a systematic conspiracy to undermine my authority and position within the royal family. Camilla is at the center of it all." Charles's face went pale as he reached for the papers. His hands, which had signed countless official documents with steady precision, now trembled slightly as he began to read. The silence in the room was broken only by the ticking of an antique clock and the occasional rustle of paper as the king reviewed each devastating page. Minutes passed before Charles looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. This can't be accurate. Camilla would never. She loves this family. She's devoted her life to supporting the crown. I thought the same thing, Father, William replied, his voice heavy with sadness. But the evidence is overwhelming. James has verified the authenticity of these documents through multiple sources. The conspiracy involves palace officials, media contacts, and even members of parliament. Charles continued reading, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When he reached the document outlining the plan to use William's grief over Diana's death against him, his face flushed with rage. "How dare they?" he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. "How dare anyone attempt to exploit your pain for political gain? Your mother's death nearly destroyed you. And to think that someone would try to weaponize your recovery." William had rarely seen his father this angry. Charles was known for his measured responses and diplomatic approach to conflicts, but this betrayal cut too deep for diplomacy. "There's more, Father," William said quietly, producing the financial documents. "These show misuse of palace funds and resources. Money intended for charitable causes has been redirected. Contracts have been awarded based on personal connections rather than merit, and palace staff have been used for what amounts to political espionage." As Charles reviewed the financial evidence, his anger transformed into something colder and more calculating. The king had spent his entire life preparing for the throne, understanding that the monarchy's survival depended on maintaining the highest standards of integrity and public trust. What he was seeing represented a fundamental violation of everything he believed in. "Sir Reginald Hartwell," Charles said, noting the name that appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. "I never trusted that man completely, but I never imagined he was capable of something like this." "He appears to be Camilla's primary collaborator," William explained. "The communications between them suggest this conspiracy has been in development for almost 2 years." Charles leaned back in his chair, suddenly, looking every one of his 75 years. The weight of kingship had always been heavy, but this personal betrayal added a dimension of pain he had never anticipated. "What do you believe their ultimate goal was?" he asked. William pulled out another document, this one outlining the conspiracy's long-term objectives. "From what I can determine, they wanted to gradually marginalize my influence to the point where I would either step back from royal duties voluntarily or be forced out due to public perception that I was unfit for future responsibilities." "And then what?" "Harry has made it clear he has no interest in returning to royal duties." "I think that was the point, Father. With me out of the picture and Harry in exile, the line of succession would be thrown into uncertainty. That kind of chaos would give Camilla and her allies tremendous influence over how the monarchy evolves." Charles stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the gardens where he had played as a child. The irony wasn't lost on him that in this place where he had learned about duty, honor, and service to the crown, he was now discovering that the person closest to him had been systematically betraying those very principles. "I need to confront her directly," Charles said finally. "But not alone. I want you there as well." "Father, are you sure that's wise? If she realizes we've discovered her activities, she might try to destroy additional evidence or turn the situation against us somehow." Charles turned back to face his son, and William could see a steely determination in his eyes that reminded him of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. "William, I am the King of England. I will not allow anyone, regardless of my personal feelings for them, to threaten the stability of the crown or harm my family. Camilla needs to know that her activities have been discovered, and she needs to face the consequences immediately." The firmness in his father's voice reassured William, though he still worried about the emotional toll this confrontation would take on the king. Charles had waited so long to marry Camilla, had endured decades of public scrutiny and criticism, and had finally found happiness with her. Learning that she had been betraying him all along would be devastating. "How do you want to handle this?" William asked. "I want you to arrange for James to secure all additional evidence and prepare a comprehensive report," Charles replied. "Then, I want you to find Camilla and ask her to meet us in the throne room in 1 hour. Don't tell her why, but make it clear that attendance is not optional." The choice of the throne room for this confrontation was significant. It was the most formal space in the palace, a place where the weight of royal authority was impossible to ignore. By choosing to meet there, Charles was making a statement about how seriously he viewed Camilla's betrayal. "What about Sir Reginald and the other conspirators?" William asked. "Once we've dealt with Camilla, We'll address them systematically, Charles said. But she is the key figure, and I want her to understand exactly how her actions have damaged not just our family, but the institution we've all sworn to protect. William nodded and moved toward the door, but Charles called him back. William, I want you to know how proud I am of you for bringing this to my attention. I know this must have been difficult, given your relationship with Camilla over the years. She was like a stepmother to me, father. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. But the evidence is too clear, and the damage too extensive to ignore. Charles approached his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. Your mother would be proud of how you've handled this. Diana always said you had the strength to do what was right, even when it was painful. The mention of Diana brought tears to William's eyes. His mother had indeed taught him about duty and integrity, and he knew she would have expected him to act exactly as he had when faced with this betrayal. I'll go find Camilla now, William said. Father, are you going to be all right? Charles straightened his shoulders and lifted his chin, every inch the monarch he had been trained to be. I will do what needs to be done, William. The crown has survived worse betrayals than this, and it will survive this one as well. As William left his father's study, he could feel the weight of history pressing down upon him. The confrontation that was about to take place would likely mark a turning point not just for their family, but for the monarchy itself. The next hour would determine whether the royal family could emerge from this crisis stronger or whether the damage would prove too extensive to repair. Walking through the corridors toward Camilla's apartments, William reflected on how different everything felt now that the truth was out in the open. The palace that had always been his home now felt like a battlefield, with allies and enemies hidden behind familiar faces. He found Camilla in her private sitting room, reviewing correspondence with her personal secretary. She looked up with a warm smile when he entered, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse around her. William, how lovely to see you, she said cheerfully. I was just reviewing the plans for next week's charity gala. I think it's going to be quite successful. The casual mention of charity work, knowing what he now knew about her misuse of charitable funds, made William's stomach turn. But he maintained his composure and delivered his father's message with perfect royal protocol. Camilla, the king requests your immediate presence in the throne room. The meeting will commence in 1 hour. Something in his tone must have alerted her that this was not a routine royal engagement. Her smile faltered slightly, and William could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. Is everything all right? She asked. The king will explain everything when you arrive, William replied formally. Please don't be late. As he left her apartments, William could feel Camilla's confused and increasingly worried gaze following him. In less than an hour, one of the most explosive confrontations in recent royal history would begin, and nothing would ever be the same again. The throne room at Windsor Castle had witnessed countless moments of historical significance, from royal weddings to state ceremonies. But the tension that filled the air as King Charles and Prince William awaited Camilla's arrival was unlike anything the ancient walls had previously contained. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained-glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor that seemed almost mocking in their beauty given the gravity of the situation. Charles stood near the throne, not sitting in it, but close enough that its imposing presence reinforced his authority. He had changed into his formal military uniform, complete with medals and insignia that spoke to his decades of service to the crown. This was not a casual family discussion. This was a monarch preparing to deal with a threat to his kingdom. William positioned himself slightly to his father's right, the comprehensive file of evidence held securely in his hands. They had agreed that William would present the findings while Charles observed Camilla's reactions and made the final decisions about consequences. Both men understood that the next hour would likely determine the future stability of the royal family. The heavy doors opened precisely on time, and Camilla entered the throne room. She had also chosen her attire carefully, wearing a conservative navy suit with her queen consort insignia prominently displayed. However, her confident facade couldn't entirely mask the nervousness in her eyes as she took in the formal setting and the serious expressions of both men. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, she said, offering the appropriate curtsies. You requested my presence? Charles studied her face for a moment before speaking, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. Camilla, we have discovered some very disturbing information that requires immediate explanation. Please sit down. She moved to the chair that had been positioned facing them, her movements betraying a growing anxiety despite her attempts to maintain composure. I'm not sure what you mean, Charles. What kind of information? William stepped forward, opening the file. Information about a conspiracy to undermine my position within the royal family, involving misuse of palace resources and systematic attempts to damage the monarchy's reputation. The color drained from Camilla's face, but she quickly attempted to recover. That sounds absolutely terrible. How can I help you investigate such a serious matter? You can start by explaining your extensive communications with Sir Reginald Hartwell regarding what you both referred to as the William problem. William continued, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he felt. These documents detail 18 months of planning and coordination aimed at destroying my credibility and influence. Charles watched his wife's face carefully as William spoke. He had learned to read people over decades of diplomatic encounters, and what he saw now was the expression of someone whose carefully constructed lies were beginning to crumble. I'm not sure what documents you're referring to, Camilla said, but her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding or misinterpretation? William placed the first document on the table beside her chair. It was a memo from Camilla to Sir Reginald, written in her unmistakable handwriting, outlining strategies for gradually diminishing William's perceived competence in public and private settings. Is this your handwriting, Camilla? Charles asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She glanced at the document, and William could see her mind racing, trying to find some explanation that might save her. Charles, you have to understand the context. There were concerns about William's readiness for additional responsibilities. I was trying to protect him, to ensure he wasn't overwhelmed by duties he might not be prepared for. Protect him? Charles's voice rose slightly. By spreading rumors about his mental state following his mother's death? By attempting to convince Parliament members that he was emotionally unstable? William placed another document on the table, this one detailing the plan to exploit his grief over Diana's death. You wrote here, and I quote, William's continued attachment to his mother's memory represents a vulnerability that can be leveraged to question his judgment in critical situations. How exactly is that protecting me? Camilla's attempts at maintaining innocence were clearly failing, and William could see panic beginning to set in. She looked between the two men, perhaps realizing for the first time how much evidence they possessed. You don't understand the pressures I've been under, she said, her voice becoming more desperate. Ever since I became queen consort, there have been expectations, demands from people who think they know how the monarchy should evolve. I was trying to navigate complex political situations. By betraying your own family? Charles asked, his disappointment evident in every word. By systematically working to destroy my son's reputation and future? William continued placing documents on the table, each one more damaging than the last. The financial records showing misappropriated charitable funds, the communications with media contacts planning negative stories about William, the detailed timeline for gradually removing him from important royal duties. The evidence is overwhelming, Camilla, William said. We have documentation spanning nearly 2 years, involving dozens of people, all coordinated through you and Sir Reginald. This isn't a misunderstanding or poor judgment. This is a calculated conspiracy. Charles moved closer to his wife, and William could see the pain in his father's eyes. Camilla, I need you to understand something. I have spent my entire life preparing to be king, and I have waited decades to marry the woman I love. But I will not allow anyone, not even you, to threaten the stability of the crown or harm my children. Charles, please, Camilla pleaded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I love you. I love this family. Everything I did was to protect our future together. William is young. He's impulsive. He doesn't understand the delicate balance required to maintain royal authority in the modern world. I'm 31 years old, William replied firmly. I have a wife, children, and a decade of experience in royal duties. What I lack is patience for people who think they can manipulate and control me behind my back. Charles picked up one of the financial documents, his hands trembling with rage as he read it again. You redirected funds meant for children's charities, Camilla. Money that should have gone to helping disadvantaged youth was instead used to pay for your political activities.
You must understand the
How do you
gravity of
justify
this
that?
situation.
Those
I
were
do, but we
strategic
must consider the
investments in the monarchy's
consequences.
There is no
future,
other way.
she replied, though even she seemed to realize how weak that sounded. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made to protect the greater good. Whose greater good? William demanded. Because from where I stand, it looks like everything you did was designed to benefit you and your allies at the expense of everyone else. The confrontation continued for another 30 minutes, with William methodically presenting evidence, while Camilla's explanations became increasingly desperate and contradictory. Charles remained largely silent, watching the woman he had loved and trusted reveal herself to be someone he no longer recognized. Finally, when the last document had been presented and Camilla's denials had been thoroughly demolished, Charles stood up and walked to the throne. He didn't sit in it, but he placed his hand on its arm, drawing strength from the symbol of everything he had sworn to protect. "Camilla," he said, his voice now carrying the full authority of the crown, "you have systematically betrayed the trust placed in you as queen consort. You have conspired against your own family, misused royal resources, and attempted to damage the institution of the monarchy itself." "Charles, I can explain everything if you'll just give me time," she pleaded. "We can work through this together. I know I made mistakes, but they came from a place of love and concern for our family's future." "No," Charles said firmly. "What you did came from ambition and a desire for power that you were willing to pursue at any cost. You manipulated people, resources, and situations to serve your own agenda, and you did it all while lying to my face every single day." William could see that his father had reached a decision, and he felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice would be done, but sadness for the pain his father was experiencing. Effective immediately, Charles continued, "You are stripped of all royal duties and responsibilities. Your title as queen consort is suspended pending a full investigation into your activities. You will surrender all official insignia, access to royal resources, and authority to act on behalf of the crown." Camilla's face went white with shock. "Charles, you can't be serious. We're married. We're a team. You can't just cast me aside because of some documents that might have been taken out of context." "I can and I will," Charles replied. "You have violated every principle that the monarchy represents, and I will not allow your actions to further damage the crown's reputation or my family's unity." William watched as the reality of the situation finally hit Camilla. The power and influence she had worked so hard to build and protect was being stripped away in a matter of minutes. Her carefully constructed plans were not just failing. They were resulting in the complete destruction of everything she had gained through her marriage to Charles. "What about us, Charles?" she asked, tears now flowing freely. "What about our marriage, our life together?" Charles looked at her with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I don't know, Camilla. I honestly don't know if there's anything left to save. You've destroyed my trust, betrayed my son, and damaged the institution I've devoted my life to protecting. Right now, I need time to determine whether our marriage can survive what you've done." The throne room fell silent except for Camilla's quiet sobbing. The woman who had entered with confidence and royal authority was now facing the complete collapse of her position and possibly her marriage. The conspiracy that was meant to secure her influence had instead resulted in her downfall. William felt no satisfaction in witnessing Camilla's distress, despite everything she had done to him. The situation was tragic for everyone involved, but it was also necessary. The monarchy could not survive if corruption and betrayal were allowed to flourish at its highest levels. As the confrontation reached its conclusion, Charles made one final declaration that would send shockwaves throughout the palace and beyond. "The investigation into this conspiracy will continue until every person involved has been identified and held accountable," he announced. "Sir Reginald Hartwell and all other conspirators will face appropriate consequences for their actions. The palace will release a statement explaining the situation to the public within 24 hours. The decision to make the matter public represented the most significant royal scandal in decades, but Charles understood that transparency was essential to maintaining public trust. The alternative, allowing rumors and speculation to spread unchecked, would be far more damaging to the monarchy's reputation." As Camilla was escorted from the throne room, her royal privileges suspended and her future uncertain, both Charles and William knew that they had crossed a point of no return. The royal family would emerge from this crisis forever changed, but hopefully stronger and more united than before. The hours following Camilla's removal from the throne room were unlike anything Windsor Castle had experienced in living memory. Word of the queen consort's dramatic fall from grace spread through the palace like wildfire, carried by hushed whispers and shocked expressions as staff members struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. James Thornberry found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity as he coordinated the immediate response to the crisis. The evidence he had uncovered was now being examined by a team of investigators, while lawyers worked frantically to determine the legal implications of Camilla's actions. The palace, usually a model of calm efficiency, had transformed into something resembling a war room as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. In his private study, King Charles sat alone for the first time since the confrontation, the weight of his decisions settling heavily on his shoulders. The man who had waited so long to become king, who had endured decades of public scrutiny about his relationship with Camilla, now faced the possibility that his marriage might not survive the revelations of the past day. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, assuming it would be William or one of his senior advisors. Instead, Princess entered the study, her face grave but determined. As the king's sister and one of his most trusted confidants, she had been briefed on the situation and had immediately returned to Windsor from her own engagements. "Charles," she said simply, taking the chair across from his desk. "How are you holding up?" "I honestly don't know," he replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "In the span of a few hours, I've learned that the woman I love has been systematically betraying our family and undermining everything we've worked to build. I'm not sure how anyone is supposed to process something like that," and studied her brother's face, seeing the pain and confusion that he was trying so hard to hide. "The important thing is that you acted decisively when you learned the truth. A weaker man might have tried to cover it up or find some way to minimize the damage. But at what cost?" Charles asked. "The public scandal will be enormous. The media will have a field day with this story, and every aspect of our family's private life will be dissected and analyzed. I've potentially destroyed my marriage and created a crisis that could damage the monarchy for years to come." "Charles, listen to me," and said firmly. "You didn't create this crisis. Camilla did. She made the choice to betray your trust and work against William. You simply chose to address it honestly rather than allowing it to continue. That took courage, and it was the right thing to do." Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, William was meeting with his communications team to prepare for the public announcement that would need to be made within hours. The challenge was enormous. How to explain the situation to the public without causing irreparable damage to the monarchy's reputation, while also ensuring that the full truth was revealed. "The key is to emphasize that the king acted swiftly and decisively when the conspiracy was discovered," advised Sarah Mitchell, the palace's senior communications director. "We need to frame this as an example of royal integrity, not royal dysfunction." William nodded, though he remained concerned about the public reaction. "What are we expecting in terms of media response?" "Honestly, sir, it's going to be intense," Sarah replied. "This story has everything the press loves: betrayal, conspiracy, royal scandal, and personal drama. We're going to face weeks, possibly months, of intensive coverage and speculation. And what about public opinion? How do we think people will react to the news that the Queen Consort has been stripped of her authority?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "The public has always been somewhat divided about the Queen Consort. Some people never fully accepted her role in the family, while others came to respect her work and dedication. This revelation will likely reinforce existing opinions rather than create new ones." As the communications team worked on drafting the official statement, investigators were conducting interviews with palace staff members who had been unknowingly involved in Camilla's schemes. The scope of her network was proving to be even larger than initially suspected, with tentacles reaching into various government departments and media organizations. Sir Reginald Hartwell had been arrested at his London home and was being questioned about his role in the conspiracy. Initial reports suggested that he was attempting to minimize his involvement and place blame entirely on Camilla, claiming that he had been manipulated by her ambitions rather than being an equal partner in the scheme. In her private apartments, Camilla sat surrounded by boxes as staff members methodically removed all items belonging to the crown. Her royal jewelry, official correspondence, and ceremonial attire were being catalogued and returned to the royal collection. The process was being supervised by officials who maintained professional courtesy while making it clear that her access to royal resources had been completely severed. Lady Margaret Whitfield, Camilla's longtime friend and confidant, had come to offer support during this difficult time. She found Camilla in a state of emotional collapse, alternating between anger at being betrayed by people she trusted and devastation at the loss of everything she had worked to achieve. "I don't understand how it came to this, Margaret," Camilla said through her tears. "Everything I did was to protect the monarchy's future. William is impulsive and emotional. He doesn't have the patience or wisdom needed for the responsibilities he'll inherit." "But, Camilla," Margaret replied gently, "surely you can see how your methods were problematic? Working in secret, manipulating people, using royal resources for personal political goals. Politics is always about manipulation and strategy, Camilla responded, her voice hardening. The only difference is that I got caught. Charles and William are being naive if they think they can run the monarchy without making difficult choices and strategic compromises. Margaret was disturbed by Camilla's apparent inability to acknowledge the ethical problems with her actions. Even facing the complete destruction of her position and marriage, she seemed to view herself as a victim rather than someone who had betrayed the trust placed in her. Back in the main palace, Charles was meeting with Prime Minister Morrison, who had been briefed on the situation and needed to understand how it might affect the government's relationship with the crown. The conversation was tense, as both men recognized the potential constitutional implications of such a significant royal scandal. Your Majesty, I need to be frank about the government's position, the Prime Minister said. While we respect your right to handle internal royal matters as you see fit, this situation has the potential to create significant political complications. What kind of complications? Charles asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. There will likely be renewed calls for Republican reform, questions about the monarchy's relevance in modern society, and demands for greater transparency in royal operations, Morrison explained. Opposition parties will almost certainly use this scandal as ammunition to argue for reduced royal privileges or even abolition of the monarchy altogether. Charles felt another wave of anger at Camilla's actions. Not only had she betrayed his family, but her conspiracy had potentially given ammunition to those who wanted to destroy the institution he had devoted his life to protecting. What do you recommend? The king asked. Complete transparency, swift justice for all involved parties, and immediate implementation of reforms to prevent similar situations in the future, the Prime Minister replied. The public needs to see that the monarchy takes corruption seriously and is willing to police itself effectively. As evening approached, William returned to his father's study to discuss the final details of the public announcement. Both men looked exhausted from the emotional toll of the day's events, but they remained focused on doing what was necessary to protect the monarchy's integrity. The statement is ready for your review, Father, William said, handing Charles a draft of the announcement. We've tried to be clear about what happened while maintaining appropriate dignity and respect for the institution. Charles read through the statement carefully. It outlined the discovery of a conspiracy involving the Queen Consort, explained the evidence that had been uncovered, and detailed the immediate actions taken in response. The language was formal but clear, leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the situation while avoiding unnecessarily inflammatory rhetoric. This is well done, Charles said after finishing his review. When will it be released? Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, William replied. That will give us time to brief senior staff and prepare for the media response. Charles signed the statement, knowing that with his signature, he was likely ending his marriage and creating the most significant royal scandal in decades. But he also knew that the alternative, allowing corruption and betrayal to go unpunished, would ultimately be far more damaging to the monarchy's future. As the two men prepared to leave the study, Charles turned to his son with an expression of profound gratitude. William, I want you to know how proud I am of you. Your courage in bringing this situation to my attention may have saved the monarchy from far worse damage down the road. We're family, Father, William replied simply. We protect each other and the institution we serve, no matter how difficult it might be. Outside the palace walls, media organizations were already beginning to sense that something significant was happening. Reporters had noticed unusual activity around Windsor Castle, and rumors were starting to circulate about a major announcement being planned for the following morning. The next few days would bring unprecedented scrutiny to the royal family, but Charles and William felt confident that they had acted with integrity and honor. The monarchy had survived worse crises in its long history, and it would survive this one as well. The only question now was whether their family relationships could be repaired after such a profound betrayal. As the palace settled into an uneasy quiet for the night, everyone understood that tomorrow would bring a new chapter in royal history. The chapter would be painful and difficult, but it would also demonstrate that the monarchy remained committed to the highest standards of integrity and accountability, even when those standards required making the most difficult personal sacrifices imaginable. 6 months had passed since the explosive revelation of Camilla's conspiracy, and the royal family was still navigating the complex aftermath of one of the most significant scandals in modern monarchy history. The palace announcement had indeed created the media firestorm that everyone had anticipated, but the public response had been more nuanced and ultimately more supportive than anyone had dared to hope. King Charles stood in his renovated study, looking out at the same gardens where he had once walked with Camilla, planning their future together. The space had been completely redesigned following her departure, symbolically representing the fresh start that the monarchy was attempting to make. Gone were the personal touches that had reflected their shared life. In their place were artifacts and artwork that spoke to the institution's long history and enduring values. The investigation into the conspiracy had revealed even more extensive corruption than initially discovered. Sir Reginald Hartwell had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy, while several other palace officials had been dismissed and faced their own legal proceedings. The financial audit had recovered most of the misappropriated charitable funds, which had been returned to their intended recipients with formal apologies from the Crown. William entered the study carrying a leather portfolio containing the latest public opinion polls and media analysis. The numbers told a story that surprised many observers. Rather than damaging the monarchy's reputation, Charles's decisive response to the conspiracy had actually strengthened public confidence in the royal family's integrity. The latest polling shows approval ratings at their highest level in over a decade, William reported, settling into the chair across from his father's desk. Apparently, the public appreciates seeing that the monarchy is willing to police itself and hold its own members accountable. Charles nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful rather than celebratory. I'm gratified that people understand why we had to act as we did, but I can't help feeling that we've lost something important in the process. The king's marriage to Camilla had indeed ended, though the divorce proceedings were being handled with as much privacy and dignity as possible under the circumstances. Camilla had left England entirely, accepting an invitation from distant relatives in Australia to start fresh away from the intense media scrutiny that continued to follow her. "Father, I've been thinking about something," William said carefully. "Perhaps it's time we discussed how this experience has changed our approach to royal duties and family relationships." Over the past months, both men had engaged in extensive discussions about how to prevent similar situations from arising in the future. The conspiracy had exposed weaknesses in palace oversight and communication that needed to be addressed systematically. "What specific changes do you think we should consider?" Charles asked. William opened his portfolio and extracted a detailed proposal that he had been developing with input from constitutional experts and trusted advisors. "I believe we need to establish formal mechanisms for transparency and accountability within the royal household. Regular audits, clear protocols for decision-making, and systems that make it much harder for anyone to operate in secret." The proposal outlined a comprehensive reform program that would modernize palace operations while maintaining appropriate royal dignity and privacy. It included provisions for regular financial audits, formal review processes for major decisions, and clear channels for reporting concerns about potential misconduct. These changes would represent the most significant modernization of royal operations in generations, Charles observed, reviewing the detailed recommendations. "Are you confident that we can implement them without compromising the monarchy's effectiveness?" "I think the conspiracy proved that our old ways of operating had become vulnerabilities," William replied. "Camilla was able to exploit informal systems and personal relationships because there weren't adequate checks and balances in place." Charles had come to the same conclusion over the past months. His trust in Camilla had been so complete that he had never questioned her activities or sought independent verification of her claims. The painful lesson was that even the closest relationships within the royal family needed to be subject to appropriate oversight. "There's another matter we need to discuss," William continued. "The question of succession planning and my own role going forward." This topic had been weighing heavily on both their minds. Camilla's conspiracy had been specifically aimed at undermining William's position and authority, but her removal had created opportunities for him to take on greater responsibilities more quickly than originally planned. "I've been impressed by your handling of this entire crisis," Charles said. "Your judgment, your integrity, and your commitment to the institution have all been exemplary. I believe you're ready for significantly expanded duties." William had indeed proven himself during the crisis, demonstrating the kind of leadership and moral courage that would be essential for the monarchy's future. His decision to bring the conspiracy to his father's attention, despite the personal and political risks involved, had shown that he could make difficult decisions when the institution's welfare was at stake. I'm honored by your confidence, Father, William replied. But I want to make sure we approach any changes thoughtfully and with input from other family members. Princess and had become an increasingly important advisor during the crisis, providing wisdom and perspective drawn from her decades of royal service. Prince Edward had also stepped up to take on additional duties, helping to fill some of the gaps left by Camilla's departure from public life. Speaking of family members, Charles said, I've been considering whether this might be an appropriate time to extend an olive branch to Harry. The relationship between William and his younger brother had been strained for years, with Harry's departure from royal duties and relocation to America creating ongoing tension within the family. However, the recent crisis had reminded everyone of the importance of family unity and mutual support. Do you think he would be receptive to that kind of outreach? William asked. I don't know, Charles admitted. But I think we owe it to ourselves and to your mother's memory to try. This crisis has reminded me how precious family relationships are and how quickly they can be damaged or destroyed. The mention of Diana brought a moment of silence to the conversation. Both men had thought often about how she would have handled the situation with Camilla's betrayal. Diana's own experiences with royal protocol and palace intrigue would have given her unique insights into navigating such complex circumstances. I think Mother would be proud of how we handled this situation, William said finally. She always believed that the monarchy's strength came from its commitment to serving others rather than pursuing personal power or advantage. Charles smiled at the memory of his late wife's idealism and dedication. She would definitely approve of the reforms you're proposing. Diana always believed that institutions needed to evolve and adapt in order to remain relevant and effective. As they continued their discussion, both men felt a sense of cautious optimism about the monarchy's future. The crisis had been painful and damaging, but it had also created opportunities for positive change and renewed public confidence. The royal family that emerged from this experience would be stronger, more transparent, and more united than before. There's one more thing I want to discuss, Charles said as their meeting drew to a close. The question of how we remember this period in royal history. This was indeed a complex question. The conspiracy and its aftermath would certainly be remembered as a significant moment in the monarchy's evolution, but how it was characterized would influence public perception for years to come. I think we should frame it as a demonstration of royal integrity, William suggested. A moment when the monarchy chose difficult truth over comfortable lies, and when family loyalty meant holding each other accountable rather than protecting each other from consequences. Charles nodded approvingly. That interpretation would serve the institution well, while also honoring the painful personal sacrifices that had been necessary to address the crisis appropriately. As William prepared to leave for his own duties, Charles reflected on how dramatically their relationship had changed over the past months. The crisis had brought them closer together and had accelerated William's development as a future king. In some ways, Camilla's betrayal had inadvertently strengthened the very institution she had tried to undermine. William, Charles called as his son reached the door. Thank you, not just for bringing the conspiracy to my attention, but for everything you've done to help our family and the monarchy navigate this difficult period. We're stronger together, Father, William replied. That's something Camilla never understood, and it's why her conspiracy was ultimately doomed to fail. As the study door closed behind William, Charles returned to his desk and the work of being king. The monarchy would continue, guided by the lessons learned from betrayal and strengthened by the bonds of genuine family loyalty. The path forward would not be easy, but it would be honest, transparent, and true to the highest ideals of royal service. Outside his window, the gardens of Windsor Castle bloomed with new growth, symbolizing the monarchy's own renewal and resilience. The royal family had survived its greatest internal crisis in living memory, and they had emerged not just intact, but improved. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy them had instead revealed their true character and commitment to the principles they served. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges and opportunities, but the royal family would face it together, united by shared values and mutual trust that had been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. In the end, that unity would prove to be the monarchy's greatest strength and its most enduring legacy.